Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first in a series of seminar events being hosted by the Inland Center for Sustainable Development, which is a research arm of the School of Public Policy at the University of California at Riverside, or UCR. My name is Rick Bishop. I have the pleasure of being one of the staff here at ICSD. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our other ICSD staff who are with us today. They've also helped in developing this 2023-24 seminar series, which is devoted to the inland region's warehousing and logistics industry. First, I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Ron Loveridge, who is the ICSD founder and functions as our senior advisor. Dr. Chin-Fong Wong is a professor at UCR and is the ICSD co-director. Kristen Kopko is ICSD's principal management analyst, and so we thank them for being here. Also, a special welcome to Dr. Mark Long, who is the Dean of the School of Public Policy here at UCR, keeping a watchful eye over us, and we appreciate his input and his support. So as a brief background, ICSD was formed in late 2019, early 2020, and really is intended to provide the region and serve as a network center, an honest broker, and a resource in policy analysis on issues that impact growth in the two-county region, both being Riverside and San Bernardino County. Our focus to date has been on how the region can best incorporate practices that can simultaneously address growth, equity, and environment. And despite the comments that you hear about California's population declining, that's not the case in the region. So we're growing, and jobs are an important part of our economic development. Our research is funded by a number of leadership council members. They're both private and public sector entities that participate in our research. They fund our research and they guide our work. If you're interested in seeing a listing of our research funders, who we call our leadership council, I would encourage you to take a look at ICSD's website. Also, to find out just more about ICSD, please take a look at the website and you can review the research and the work that has been done to date. That website is icsd.ucr.edu. If you're interested in joining ICSD as a research partner, please contact us. I'll ask Kristen Kopko if she might be able to put her email address into the Q&A, so you've got that. So this past spring, as ICSD was developing its proposed research agenda for the next 18 months, we decided to take a look at the manufacturing and logistics industry in the two counties. At that time, we convened a meeting or focus group of a number of practitioners and experts on the issue so that we could learn more about this industry, and we thought it would help us refine and develop our work program. After completing the focus session, we quickly realized that session made it very evident to us that we had much more to learn. We had much more to hear from a wide range of inputs and experts. So we thought in order to better give ourselves a good chance of being a good research entity within the Inland Empire and being able to provide consistent and objective research, we needed to hear more about this. So we decided to expand and have this focus group seminar series. So you'll hear more about that as we move ahead. So I think those of you that have been following this industry and its very rapid growth in the region, you know that there's people that sit on both sides of the issue. There's people that think it's the greatest thing in the world, and there's people that think it's not. And that shouldn't be surprising. I mean, we tend to put ourselves into camps all the time. We've got dog lovers and cat lovers. We have conservatives and liberals. We have Raider fans and people that don't own guns. And so people just line up on both sides of the issue all the time. And so the warehousing and logistic issue is no different. We plan to explore it further, as I mentioned, so that we can refine our work program. Just real quickly, mark your calendars. On October 11th, we'll have the second in our seminar series. We're going to be examining the impacts of the industry on pollution and public health. And then on November 1st, we'll take a look at the impacts on employment, quality of jobs, and our transportation system impacts as well. So it should be real informative sessions. We've lined up a number of great speakers in addition to the panel we have today. So both of those sessions will be like today at 4 o'clock. So I'm really pleased today to introduce our panelists, and then we'll get right to it, who are here to help us with this very first of our seminar series, taking a look at the business, economics, scale, role, and future of this region's fastest growing sector. And in no particular order, I'll introduce the panelists. First, we have Dr. Gigi Marino. She's a senior economist with the Southern California Association of Governments, also known as SCAG. They're the regional metropolitan planning organization for the 6-county region that includes R2 and then counties. Gigi, thank you for being here and participating. Second, we have Weston LaBar. Weston is the Senior Vice President of Industry Relations and the Chief Spokesperson for Cargomatic. Brings great perspective and input to us as well. Thank you, Weston, for joining us. Matt Burris is the the Deputy City Manager for the city of Rancho, Cucamonga, a city that has been one of the front and center cities in taking a look and incorporating logistics and warehousing within its incorporated limits. Scott Agajanian, who I've known for many, many years, is the Economic Development Director for the city of Murrieta, which has not been as active as many other cities in the region on this particular issue, but we think that that perspective that he brings to the table is also really, really important. And then last but certainly not least, Dr. Ellen Reese. Dr. Reese is the Chair of Labor Studies and Professor of Society, Environment and Health Equity, also here at UC Riverside. So thank you all for being with us. We really appreciate it. We certainly want to be mindful of your time as well as the time of the audience, and we will do our best to shut this thing down promptly at 5 p.m. Okay, so with all that, let's start with the first question, and we'll just throw it out there, and whoever wants to take a stab, feel free to have at it, and others feel free to chime in as well. So discuss the most important opportunities and challenges regarding logistics and warehousing in inland Southern California.
I'll jump in.
You hit the buzzer first.
Yeah, I'm known for that, by the way. Yeah, Weston LaBar with Cargomatic. And, you know, given a lot of the different topics that surround transportation, and I really wish we could switch the narrative away from talking about trucks and logistics only when we talk about traffic congestion and pollution, right? Because actually, I think one of the biggest opportunities we have here in Southern California is that we actually have the cleanest supply chain from the port to our border. That includes, we have the cleanest trucks, we have the most stringent environmental regulations as it relates to warehouse, we have the most sustainable industrial buildings, especially the new ones being built. The South Coast Air Quality Management District, with their indirect source rules, have requirements around clean facilities, and the California Air Resources Board around the clean trucks. And I bring this up because, listen, the only way that you're going to see less emissions because there's less trucks is if people stop buying things. And I've been told that's bad for the economy in general. When people stop buying things, it means less jobs, it means less economic opportunity. However, when you build warehouses and or you're retrofitting them so they're more environmentally sustainable, you're creating construction jobs. It's a great boon for the region. The jobs that then stay in those facilities are great. And the thing is we have the largest twin seaport complex in the entire Western Hemisphere. And that cargo is going to go through our region, whether we like it or not. I like it, some don't, as we pointed out. However, that cargo going through our region, we have the opportunity to get the jobs, and we have the opportunity to have the most environmentally sustainable supply chain, at least through the leg in California, given all the regulatory requirements that come throughout the state of California. Meanwhile, we have done our absolute best to overreach on a lot of these regulations, and just in the different processes we have, whether that's CEQA or whether that's mandates that don't have the technology to actually meet the mandates, i.e. electric trucks right now. We're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. And by attracting business here, we actually have the biggest opportunity, in my opinion, which is to have the most jobs, the highest, tap into a growing sector where jobs continue to become higher paying, and at the same time do it in a way that's going to be more sustainable and environmentally friendly than any other place in the world. So that's where I think the biggest opportunity is.
Rick, I'll tag on to what Weston threw out there. And from the city side, many people don't know, Rancho really is very much an industrial based city. We have been for a long time. We just had the last steel mill in California shut down about 2 years ago. We've got over 40 million square feet of industrial in the city. One of the things that has really helped us is to try and our best to get the clearest, most accurate information to the table that we possibly can. And one of the things that we have found is that this sector of the economy really is one of extremes. You know, like Weston said, it is a huge economic driver. It has certainly been a part of why the Inland Empire fared so well during COVID. I mean, we're adding jobs while the rest of the state was shedding jobs. We're adding population, like while so many areas in the state are shedding population. We're a bigger metropolitan region now than the Bay Area. I mean, this is significant, and part of it is because of our geography, our transportation network, and because we are this really important global inland port. And certainly the scale of it is mind-boggling. On a local level, this sector can really drive just incredible, massive investment, right? I mean, we've got million square foot warehouses going up, and you know, single million square foot warehouse might represent a $300 million investment in a community. And I think, like Weston said, we have an extremely clean supply chain. On the other hand, what we find is that this sector, which plays a major role in the global economy, brings with it some local impacts. And I don't want to discount that the industry, that the segments or operations around so much of industry is cleaning up, but we still have to recognize that there are some severe local impacts. Like there's a neighborhood I'm familiar with, not in Rancho Cucamonga, but close by in the 15 corridor, where the industrial grew up around the single family neighborhood, and the residents literally have to wash the soot off their back porch every day. You know, I mean, like we just have to recognize and acknowledge that these are real impacts. And other communities in the Inland Empire, where some of the investment, the changes in the typology of industrial activity have changed, and we got caught flat-footed, you know, collectively as on the local side, they have some pretty severe transportation and congestion issues and safety issues. So it is absolutely a massive opportunity for the Inland Empire, because it does bring so much economic activity. But we also have to be very clear that these businesses, these uses can come with some severe local impacts if we're not paying attention and we're not managing them appropriately.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Reese, and I'm glad Matt Burris is bringing up some of those local impacts, because I really think they are serious ones to consider. And in addition to, you know, there is still intense levels of air pollution. You know, definitely there have been some regulatory changes and improvements, but we still have very high levels of air pollution in this region, which impacts not just the quality of the air, but our health, our public health. There's very high rates of asthma, respiratory illness in our communities. Our workers also are impacted very much by the growth of these industries. Many of the jobs are not good jobs, you know, especially for warehouse workers who are working in low wage jobs, many times precarious, often as seasonal workers, and they face unsafe conditions every day. The injury rates within these facilities is very high, particularly within Amazon facilities. And automation, you know, could also displace a lot of workers, right? So I think we really need to think about, you know, what kind of growth we want, and whether we want to just put all our eggs in one basket, right? Do we want to put so much into this one industry, or do we need to think about other industries and their growth as well, and diversifying our economy, making it more sustainable and better for workers? I think we have an opportunity to really, you know, also improve the conditions, right, within this industry. And workers have been organizing around that. I think there's historic opportunities if we really support and involve worker voice and community voice. I think we could, you know, further improve the quality of working conditions in this industry. But I do really seriously think we also need to think about not just simply growing this one industry. There are some serious impacts that it has.
And I'll jump in now if I can. Appreciate that input, and definitely, Matt, I like the balance that you brought to the conversation. Workforce was my first consideration when we talk about opportunities and challenges. You know, this industry really did bring Riverside County from kind of this large bedroom, and Riverside and San Bernardino County, from this large bedroom community into more of a stable workforce. But as Dr. Risha said, you have to diversify all workforces, and that's part of an evolution of a region. You'll find that in our case, Murrieta, we really focus on biotech, medical technologies down here, healthcare services. And so we don't have as much of that industrial, but we're looking to add that to diversify our local economy. So we're actually going through methods of trying to add more business park, and maybe some of that will be logistics. I don't think we're ever going to be the kind of the big box scale of logistics, but maybe a nice balance within some other kind of manufacturing type uses down here. But there's definitely a benefit from a workforce side to giving people an opportunity to work at home. On the other hand, I think to your point, Dr. Reese, when the metropolitan statistical area that we sit in ranks around 300 out of 360 as far as lowest GDP per capita, there's a challenge there that we have to work on, and automation might be some of that solution. Whereas we're creating new jobs with these industries, the future jobs are going to be higher paying, they're going to be much more technical, they're going to require some reskilling and higher training, and those are going to bring higher wage jobs. Maybe not as many, but definitely help us kind of boost that income level. And as we all know, the future of work is always a hard thing to prognosticate. We think we know what the next generation of jobs looks like, and we're all completely wrong when we go down that path. So I do think that logistics has done some really great stuff in the region. I do think that it also has some drawbacks. Every industry has effects and things that need to be mitigated for. But definitely, I think the workforce piece is really a compelling component because the Riverside, San Bernardino County regions have so much retail. There are so many kind of base level jobs in this region that we really needed to find some things to kind of boost up basic income to the economy. And logistics was something that came in and kind of took that gap. And in a vacuum where nothing else comes in to take that opportunity, something was going to, and this happened to be what it was.
Yeah, if I could just make a couple, I don't know if Gigi, if you wanted to go, but just a couple quick points. One is, I would like to point out that during the pandemic, the ports were busier than ever. And because we didn't have so much commuter traffic, we actually had some of the best clean air days when the ports were moving the most freight. So I think that shows that it's not just the supply chain that contributes to air emissions, it's actually all of us. And in fact, a lot of the air emissions that we see coming from the ports, if you actually know the geography, the entire Inland Empire is like a fishbowl, and the ports were put in San Pedro Bay and not Santa Monica Bay because it was felt like the air quality could be kind of contained to a specific geographical area. The unfortunate thing in California is we built a lot of industrial uses and then put houses around them and schools around them. And that's what we now have to figure out how to dig out of, is the intentional purpose of putting it where it was for a reason that no longer makes sense. And so I think we have to also look at the fact that commuter traffic and localizing jobs is a huge part of what the emissions, the lowering of emission strategy should be. Our ESG strategy as a basin should be about localizing jobs, which bringing some of those supply chain jobs away from places like Carson, California, Long Beach, and bring them out to the Inland Empire, I think actually benefits in many cases some of the air quality opportunities. The second thing that I would say is that if you look at just the way consumption happens now, a lot of the emissions happens because people are buying and having things sent to their home, which has very much complicated the supply chain in general, and reverse logistics. Every time you buy that shirt or that dress in 5 different colors and send 3 or 4 of them back, you're contributing to the emissions of your local community, because quite frankly, it used to be a situation where folks would go to one place, try things on, and then leave. Now everything's showing up every day and you're sending it all back, and people don't understand their personal impact on sustainability vis-a-vis supply chain. And I think that's a huge part of the equation that we're not looking at, is the holistic approach. All we talk about are heavy duty trucks coming in out of the port. And the last thing that I think is super important to point out is whenever we talk about the equipment, everybody immediately thinks because the ports are right here. Well, these ports have the cleanest trucks and equipment in the world. A big reason that you also have emissions in the inland that you don't have here is because you have a lot of trucks coming from out of state that are not under California regulations. That's what the South Coast Air Quality Management District is trying to get to right now. But really, as communities in a place like California, we should be advocating for national policies around sustainability in the supply chain. So California is not at a competitive disadvantage for the, let's just say, cheaper procurers of freight vendors, and at the same time still get those jobs. So I think there's a lot more to this when you unpack the issue, that doesn't just come down to the industry's dirty and the jobs aren't good. You really need to take a look at holistically what's causing the pollution. And it's not always our equipment. It's actually sometimes people driving to and from the jobs. and it's the way people are consuming and where the trucks are coming from. And the dirtiest trucks are coming from across the border in other states, not from California.
Dr. Marino, anything to add?
You might be on mute.
Dr. Marino, we can't hear you.
Still can't hear you. Okay, well, while we're waiting, just keep talking, Dr. Marino, and then when we hear you, we're going to come right back to you. But
Yeah, I mean, we do certainly have some better environmental regulations here in California than elsewhere in the nation. And I agree. And I like the idea and vision of scaling up, right, these environmental regulations in other, so that they are, you know, national. Yeah. But at the same time, I think we do need to come back to reality, and that, you know, this transition, this clean energy transition, we are not there yet, right? And there are many dirty diesel trucks on the road, right? And it's going to be quite a while, right? As for these environmental regulations to be in full effect, right? And to be enforced and to be made accessible to many truck drivers who are independent contractors, right? Many who would argue are misclassified employees, right? Of large corporations, right? And having more accessible ways for them to sort of finance, you know, this clean energy transition would be very, very important, I think. I think we, you know, I would like to think we, you know, we have really clean air in this region, but the reality and the statistics show we still don't, right? And you know, although, you know, there are some jobs created with this industry, I really think we need to think hard about the quality of those jobs. And if you look, relatively speaking, the logistics industry is not the highest paying, right? It's not, and it's relatively low paying, and it's relatively lower paying in this region when compared to other Southern California counties.
Yeah,
So-
and I mean, obviously, Dr. Reese, I think that everybody wants higher paying jobs. I mean, Murrieta is a city with average income of 136,000. So we actively look to recruit high paying industries. But, you know, sometimes things that are allowed to go in certain places are allowed to go in certain places, and we can't just deny them because of pay rates, right? We have to advocate for rates and values to come up. I think one of the concerns you mentioned the first time around was really about how we typecast a region. And I think, you know, one of the concerns that I have is that we become seen as just a logistics hub and kind of get ignored for all of the other diversity of jobs that can happen here, so that things like that don't even try to come to the region. And so I do think that there's one of the challenges is really kind of showing a robust economy that has a variety of different jobs. When you look at the number of jobs from logistics, it's still not the top. You know, we still have government, we have professional services, we have a lot of other high employers out here. And so, and education, of course, is high on the list. So there's a lot of other opportunities in our valley, but it's certainly one that I think is, when most people look from the outside of the region, one that comes to mind first. And so that is one of the challenges that I see. I mean, it certainly has done a great job in creating some jobs, but it's also kind of taken the mantle as this is what we are. And I do think that that's a little bit challenging.
And, you know,
Can you guys hear me? Is that,
Yes.
can I be heard
Now we
yet?
got you.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay,
we can
great.
hear.
So, I mean, just to add to that is that the workforce, developing the workforce is really important. And I think one way to diversify the workforce, because I mean, currently many of the jobs in the logistics sector are considered low quality jobs. So how do we raise that? And one is through skill building, so that the workforce that we have is complementary to the opportunities for automation and robotics use in the industry, which I think is inevitable. And so I think it's important that we emphasize training and education to make the labor, the labor that we have now, more complementary to the direction that the industry is going, whether it's automation, robotics, or clean technology. And as you increase that human capital, there's an opportunity to also diversify outside of these lower quality jobs.
Yeah,
in this.
I also think if you look at manufacturing as it sits today, most manufacturers are really supply chain companies. They design a product, they source things from all over the world, they import it, and then they bring it to a final assemblance hub and put it together, right? So a lot of times when we talk about logistics, we're thinking about the men and women who are driving a truck or working in a warehouse, but we're not thinking about that manufacturing floor where they're waiting on the components, which very much is a supply chain driven industry at this point in time with very high paying jobs, specifically advanced manufacturing. And as you talk about things like automation and robotics, I would ask people to look at the payroll down at the port of LA and Long Beach. The highest payroll for any terminals at Long Beach Container Terminal, which is the most automated terminal we have in the entire Western Hemisphere. Why is that? Because they're hiring more people that are doing the clerks, they're hiring higher skilled mechanics. They're essentially hiring that next generation of workers and helping us define who they are. And one of the other automated terminals, just as a fun case study, TrayPack, they actually went to the aerospace industry and had to specially train mechanics to work on their automated equipment because the folks that they had within the LW working on chassis and some of the other equipment that they would typically repair didn't have the skill set necessary to work on these advanced pieces of equipment. So again, it's a skills gap thing. And as someone who sits as vice chair of the Pacific Gateway Workforce Board, that skills gap comes in every single day when we're talking about the jobs that are available in the region and the skill set that people have to meet those jobs. And in some instances, especially when you're talking about advanced manufacturing, or you're talking about what essentially is becoming not mechanics jobs, but really engineering jobs. When you think about it, you have to take a look at what those skill sets are needed to move those jobs forward. And quite frankly, that's where we failed, I feel like, is the industry's trying to move ahead, but we have not trained people adequately to be able to take that next step. And in a high functioning advanced manufacturing setting, just having a warm body sitting there is not going to get the job done.
I agree. And I think the high road training partnerships, right, is really important. And with the path, right, to high road jobs, but that means also improving the quality of the jobs. I think with automation too, we need to really recognize that there are real health and safety concerns. And in fact, research has shown that more automated warehouse facilities tend to have higher injury rates on average. And so we really need to think about this, because this is a very large industry in our region, right? So these are health and safety concerns that rural workers have, right? Our research teams have talked to workers. They've talked to workers who've been injured on the job, right? And that we really need to better protect our workers from those injuries. We have some good legislation on the books, AB 701, right, around the work quotas, which have been absolutely unreasonable within this industry. The fast pace that workers are pressured to work at is really dangerous, right? And it creates workers who slip and fall and injure. We also have really loud machinery as well, through which workers lose their hearing permanently. And so I really think we need to think about those health and safety standards, enforcing them, making sure we have people on the ground to actually monitor and enforce the health and safety conditions, not just in this industry, but many industries in this region.
Great, thanks. I'm just going to grab one of the questions that's come in. This might be best for either you, Weston, or Dr. Marino or Dr. Reese, but somebody's asking, are there any rigorous studies to examine the reduction of negative impacts due to technological changes? Is there anything that's on the books that you can point to, or is this something that still needs to be undertaken?
I think it's still, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask for a rephrase of the question, so go ahead. If you understand the question, please move forward.
Are there any rigorous studies to examine the reduction of negative impacts from this industry due to technology?
To the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any specific studies. I think that's still out there in the early stages. I don't know if Dr. Reese, if you have specific references that you'd like to provide.
Well, I do think there has been a lot of research, that shows where workers have more of a voice on a job, they tend to have a safer workplace. So I really think, having a unionized workforce would really better protect our workers. It would not only help to raise their wages, but also protect them from health and safety violations. When workers have a union to represent them, when they can have an advocate at their side if they have a complaint and need to file a grievance, that helps to protect the workforce. Also, people who can be organized if there are health and safety violations that they're experiencing, where they can't even go to the bathroom. Like there is AB 701 that says that's against the law. Every a working person should be able to go to the bathroom if they need to, right? And to hold it, right, could lead workers to dehydrate themselves. It can lead to all sorts of health impacts, but having an organization behind you, right, makes for a safer workplace where workers have more of a voice at the job. But many workers, face retaliation for organizing, and this is, it's still a current issue. Just this past week, right, there was Amazon workers were organizing, right, around demands, including things like asking for no retaliation for organizing, right, for asking for more health and safety on the job, not just around injuries, but also around heat illness, right? This is an increasing issue with climate change, and particularly because we're in a desert region, right? And so making sure workers know about the outdoor and indoor health regulations, enforcing those and implementing them is absolutely critical.
Yeah, on the notion of studies, I always find this interesting because this in general in this industry, studies are looked at as very good if people agree with them, and studies looked at as inaccurate if you don't. And typically, I sit on the board of the American Trucking Association's Intermodal Carrier Conference, and we look at the studies of the American Transportation Research Institute a lot of times. And these are the types of things that we bring up to say we'd really like to study the health and safety impacts that automation brings in warehousing, right? So on one side, you get industry-led studies that will, in many times, corroborate what industry's saying, and other times you have labor-driven studies that corroborate what labor's saying, and sometimes the truth somewhere in the middle, quite frankly. But I think there's one thing that's absolutely true that no one can disagree with, and that is great companies are made by great people. And quite frankly, if you don't support your workers and you don't support the people within the industry, whether that's with the proper type of pay, safety on the job, training, et cetera, then I think as companies, you're really setting yourselves up to not be a great company. And at the end of the day, people and culture are really what is most important in any workplace. At least that's from my perspective and the companies that I do work with. And for those that try to take shortcuts with workers, especially in a state like California, they're setting themselves up to not be in business anymore. And quite frankly, that's rightfully so. So whether you think that I think that the jury's still out on whether or not there's really good studies that help summarize whether there's what the impacts truly are. I think a lot of the stuff that we get is still nascent. It's still very early on. But in any time you have an industrial revolution of any sort, there's pros and cons that come out of it. But at the epicenter of everything should always be people. And that's the part that I think we lose when we just get into the nuts and bolts of automation, right? We need to keep in mind that some automation's good for workers because it helps make them safer, and some automation's bad for workers. And that is the stuff that we really need to start taking a look at and then instituting best practices where everybody can benefit.
Yeah, it's really hard anecdotally to compare an entire industry. Generally speaking, economic growth is good for everyone. Mm-hmm. Across the board, countries that have greater economies have longer lifespans, greater quality of life, better education. All good things come from economic growth. Now, whether this industry has done a good job of producing all of that, like you said, it's nascent, maybe it remains to be seen, but it's certainly the case that this economy, our region has grown and good things come out of that. And of course, there's challenges along the way, but that's what we're all about, right? You address those challenges, but you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Great.
And partly, just it helps to have the best information at the table, right? We can make good decisions about what's going on, how to focus investment so that we're minimizing our impacts and taking advantage of the investment if we know what's going on and we're honest about what we might be facing.
Great.
Yeah. And the very last thing I would say on this is we're focused so much right now on these low wage jobs that nobody seems to want to have in the communities anyway. I do a lot of work with early stage startups in the freight tech sector. I've been an investor before. The jobs that are being created are much more professional, high skill jobs. You're talking about computer engineering. You're talking about really good construction jobs, and you're talking about clean tech, the manufacturing jobs. And so part of it shouldn't just be the jobs that we're losing. It should be what jobs are they being replaced with, and how do some of these efforts help get us better jobs in our communities? Because if we're able to spur innovation, we're able to create opportunities for folks to create whole new economies, the green economy, the blue economy, every economy that comes out of really what is government-driven innovation. Those are the opportunities we don't talk enough about. We talk about what we could lose. We don't talk about what we can gain quite enough.
Yeah, Weston, I think all those new jobs are really important. I think that's the direction we want to head in. My concern here is that I question whether we have done enough, we have invested enough to make sure that our labor force is sufficiently skilled to do those jobs, our local labor force. In Riverside County, only 25% of the population over the age of 25 have a bachelor's degree. In San Bernardino County, it's only 23%. In the SCAG region as a whole, it's closer to 34%. In the state of California, outside of the SCAG region, it's 40%. So the Riverside and San Bernardino counties have to, policymakers and institutions, employers have to make sure that we are educating our workforce so that we can take advantage of those great jobs that you pointed out, the engineering jobs, the jobs that use the AI, that use the robotics, and solve these problems and do the specialized manufacturing.
I 100% agree, and a great way to get around that is community benefit agreements that provide the training resources by private sector companies who want to install this equipment or build the facilities in everybody's community. Then we should be training those communities to help get those jobs. And I've worked on many development agreements where community benefits is a big part of it, and working with the local community to understand how does the local community get something more than a warehouse where they have an opportunity to go apply for something, but actually where there's priority given to local hire, where there's priority given to training the local workers, there's money invested back in the community. This is something that California is a leader on. And I think the closer you get to the coast, the more prevalent it is. But in many cases, this is the way to get to that, to bridge that gap, right? Is you need to invest in the communities to allow that to be a rising tide that lifts all boats, including the workers. You just need to give them the opportunity. If they choose not to take advantage of it, that's one thing, but we should be investing again in people.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. And I think community benefit agreements have to include, the voice of the community, the voice of workers at the table, right? There's too many of these economic development deals, right, are deals between politicians and developers, right? And we miss, right, the involvement, the engagement of community and workers, right, who are demanding something better, something different, right? Many environmental justice organizations have called for a moratorium, right, on further development of warehouses in this region, right? They do want to diversify their economies, right? They are asking for something different, something better. I think workers too, would like to have more good jobs, right? But we need to raise the bar. We need to not just say you can have this new development, at any wages or whatever. In other places, right, they say we need living jobs. We need to make sure that those living wage jobs are available to local residents, right? But to do that, right, we need to make sure, right, that workers and community residents are at the table, right, and very much involved, right, in economic development.
Yeah, if we're talking Inland Empire, then I think Dr. Murrieta's point about the educational assets we have here are really pertinent. If we're going to have the lowest educated region in Southern California and expect the highest paying jobs in Southern California, we're missing the boat. Large scale employers really look at your workforce before they make big investment decisions. And they're looking at this region and saying, the workforce for these types of industry are here, because they match the job requirements, the education requirements that we have. And so one of our challenges, I think, from looking at it from a statewide region, is that state of California has focused coastal for so long on major investments and not focused inland. And so if you're going to have a county that's got, in our case, 2.6 million people, and put all of the educational attainment on the back of UC Riverside and think, here, we've got that handled, we're good now. That's not an appropriate way to run a county. And satellite campuses for Cal State isn't enough. We've got a bunch of Band-Aids, but we do not have an infrastructure in place to educate people and keep them here. And thinking that they're going to go coastal, educate, and then come back here to live is not a proper way to run the inland part of your state. So I really think we're missing the boat on education. And we've created the environment that's going to focus on lower wage jobs because we're not creating the educational attainment opportunities for those to get the higher wage jobs. If our community had the same educational attainment, 2 doctors here out of 5 people on the panel, then we would have a completely different business set in our region than we do right now.
Yeah, good points. And I think everybody agrees that there's no doubt that the types of jobs affiliated with the industry are going to change, and probably change for the better as far as higher incomes is concerned. The challenge for the inland region, as you guys have all articulated, is where are those jobs going to land? And, so this goes way beyond the industry's responsibility. It seems like it really lands in the lap of educators and, city and county planners. And the whole idea is, you want to make the inland region as appealing as possible from a quality of life standpoint, which covers a broad range of issues. So we'll look into that more in the future panels, but a really good input. Okay, second question of 4 is how has your organization taken any actions regarding the challenges and opportunities that you just listed? And if so, maybe briefly describe what you're up to.
I think maybe we could start with SCAG's recent approval of our goods movement resolution, because it provides kind of an umbrella for what each of you guys are doing in your roles. And so the regional council, the SCAG's regional council, adopted the goods movement resolution earlier this year. And this resolution makes a strong commitment to collaboration with local, state, and federal partners to plan, fund, implement projects and strategies that ensure a safe, resilient, and efficient supply chain and goods movement system. And some of the key principles of this resolution that target warehousing in the logistics sector is exploring and advancing transition toward zero emissions and clean technologies and other transformative technologies, supporting workforce development and opportunities, particularly around deploying zero emissions and clean technology. So promoting the education, the skill building, so that workers in this sector can their skills can complement the needs of the sectors and the needs of the entire region as a whole. And another principle underlying this resolution is advancing comprehensive systems level planning of corridor and supply chain operations and strategies that are region wide, and integrating with road and rail infrastructure and inland ports, and prioritizing the regional comprehensive plan and implementing strategies in the SCAG region. And I think a big emphasis on this is both deploying and assisting the transition to clean technologies, and also coordinating with all the different stakeholders in the sector to help make that happen, and to take into consideration the different perspective and the different stakeholders, not just industry, not just government sectors, but also labor and also communities.
Yeah, I think, being at a venture-backed supply chain technology company that was now 10 years old, we've invested a lot of money in systems that optimize the operations, right? And early on, when we were doing our first product was what we call same day short haul delivery, right? So pallets of freight moving around a local region, and by optimizing and densifying that, our technology would save as much as 40% in local air emissions just by having smarter routing. But what we've pivoted to, and the three things that I want to highlight in the last 6 months that we've done. One is the engagement with educational and workforce development institutions to give feedback from an employer's perspective. So again, I mentioned I'm vice chair of the workforce board for Pacific Gateway, which is the city of Long Beach and some of the surrounding cities, but I also sit on the Cal State University of Long Beach Center for International Trade and Transportation Steering Committee, right? So talking specifically about what we're looking for from workers. Internally, on the skill side, we are investing heavily, and we've created and continued to enhance our Cargomatic University, which is an internal training program which does an onboarding boot camp. Every year, everybody goes through a reauthorization boot camp, and then we have a continuing ed that helps folks take the modules to get the skills they need for their own career advancement within our company and or to go elsewhere. And then on the sustainability front, what I'm really excited about, I partnered with the city of Long Beach. We identified a piece of property about 3 miles from the port that was an old, dilapidated former manufacturing facility. We're actually, Q1 of next year will open the city's first green truck yard. We're installing 10 electric charging stations. We're able to then create essentially with our marketplace end-to-end zero emissions delivery, as long as the equipment meets the duty cycle of where things are going, because this is very much a hub and spoke approach in zero emissions based on how far these trucks can drive. But as a private sector, participant in this, it's really about investing in your people, investing in your values. And those are the things that we're doing because we realize that that's where the industry's going. And if we want to have great people, we have to invest in our people in the form of training specifically for what we want to do our way of supply chain, which is different because we are a technology company than maybe some of the folks that you all are familiar with, right? And then secondarily, it's investing in the infrastructure to control our own destiny in the race through zero emissions. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of companies that may go out and try to buy a truck, but it becomes a novelty because they may or may not have the infrastructure to support it. They're not really deploying it in their everyday, duties with their customers, their operations. And really, for some companies, it's how do we intelligently get to the point where this can be part of our everyday operation, as opposed to just a marketing flyer that we're sending out to customers to say, hey, we have an electric truck, come work with us.
So I'd like to talk about the UCR IE Labor and Community Center. This is a new labor and community center, part of a growing network of UC labor centers that are expanding statewide. But in this region, we've been doing what we can to collaborate with labor and community in terms of helping to build up leadership skills of our youth, of students through paid labor summer internship programs that partner with local regional labor organizations, including organizations like the Warehouse Worker Resource Center. We do also support struggles of workers when they emerge, including those of the IE Amazon Workers United, right, who have been taking action again for a living wage, for health and safety on the job, and no retaliation. And so supporting them and engaging with them, right, in their struggles. And also to try to increase people's awareness, right, about these opportunities that people have to support workers on the ground who are struggling. We've also been trying to document the Teamsters 1932 Training Center, right, which has been working with high road union employers, right, and trying to create that pathway for workers who do want to work in this industry so that they can find good jobs, good union jobs. They do exist, right? So we're trying to document and lift up some of the important work that's been happening in our region, including that of worker centers, right? In addition to the Warehouse Worker Resource Center, the IE Black Worker Center has also been working on skills development important, right? And I think this also needs to be an important part of, thinking about how do we reskill, retool our workforce. Certainly, worker centers, unions need to be part of that process, right? And in collaboration with higher education institutions. So we've also been doing research, documenting some of the concerns, some of the issues, right, around this industry, and thinking about these strategies in partnership, right, with community and labor organizations.
Okay, great. So panelists, we have about 10 minutes left. Matt, do you want to say something? Then we'll.
Well, we can move on, Rick, if you want, in terms of things that organizations have done. About 2 years ago, we updated our, well, I guess we're pushing 4 years now, 3 years ago. COVID timeline is all a big blur, but we worked hand in hand with NAIOP to revisit our industrial development code, looking more broadly than logistics and warehousing, of course, but to better understand where the impacts to our community could be and adjusting our tools. I think it's a little bit of a precarious position for us to imply that the logistics and warehousing industry, are the ones to be villainized here. Because I can tell you what, if you ask any economic developer or any city manager in the region, what is worse than an industry who has big impacts coming into your city? It's that nobody wants to come to your city. And the reality is that there's an incredible amount of capital behind the industrial sector right now. And the industrial sector can deliver a lot of community benefits, if we are, again, thinking about what it is that we need, being honest about what the potential impacts are and working around them. And we worked real closely with NAIOP and our community to look at what those potential impacts were and restructure our code requirements. I'll just lay it out real quickly. What we did is we were real clear about what it is that we want. I mean, honestly, we like the smaller size industrial buildings. We like the buildings that are not specialized for specific uses, and it's because they're more flexible over time. They're more adaptable, and we see greater revenue per acre, and we see more jobs per acre. But nobody wants to build that stuff right now. Really, everybody wants to build the really big logistics facilities. And so what we try to do is engineer an opportunity into the code where we could realize some of these community benefits and provide a path forward for those industries where they're or those uses or those users where there's a clear economic driver, clear capital behind it. And as a result, we laid out expectations and needs on connectivity and environmental performance, mix of uses, et cetera, and laid out a path where some of these sectors of the industrial economy that could have greater impacts have a little bit higher review process and opportunity to better calibrate each individual project and proposal to better minimize specific uses because they can be so specific and unique, but still provide a path forward for community to realize new investment. Okay,
about 8 minutes left, so the last answers hopefully will be a little bit brief, but so I'm going to combine a couple of questions, and then there was one that came in on the Q&A that I thought you might be able to respond to. So I'm going to try to incorporate 3 questions in one, but it shouldn't be that difficult. So finally, given the discussion we've had so far, what strategies would you recommend that could address the issue of logistics and warehousing? I guess maybe a better way of saying is what research needs to be done that maybe hasn't been done or re-articulated in a certain way. And then related to that is what can we at the UCR ICSD do to contribute to this dialogue? And then along with that, one of the questions that came in is how can direct stakeholders like residents become better informed about the trade-offs of these decisions so that they can have a more informed point of view, whether it's pro this industry or anti this industry. So it's sort of a 3-in-1, but they're all kind of related.
So I'm going to jump in first on this one because I think it ties into what Matt was saying last. We're investing millions in our city to build a real large, dense job center, and it's largely focused around Business Park because we recognize the value of it. And as Weston said earlier, logistics isn't just one thing. It's assembly, it's manufacturing. A lot of people are doing multiple pieces in one spot. And as Matt said, a lot of these buildings, if you can build them flex, you can give yourself a lot of opportunity for different kinds of uses. So we're investing a lot to make sure we get that kind of use. But one of the strategies we have is putting together a specific plan for a large region. It's about 220 acres where we're putting this infrastructure in that we can really kind of highlight for the development community what we want locally. And so I think local control becomes a big part of this. When municipalities haven't thought ahead and all of a sudden wake up one day and go, goodness, what are we going to do with these millions of square feet of industrial when the market shifts and something else comes along? We're really trying to focus on things like, what is the appropriate footprint? You know, what is the appropriate size and impacts that we're willing to accept here in our community? And in turn, we're going to create an environment where those that come into our region know what you can do in Murrieta without having to go through a big process. We're going to do some of the lifting and legwork for them in advance. Meaning you'll come in and you'll already know what the aesthetics are going to look like. You're already going to know what you can lay out for a footprint, and it's not going to be 2 million square feet, you know, but maybe it's 300,000 square feet. Whereas Matt said, you get more bang for the buck. So that's one of the things that we're doing here.
So I'll just on this, since we're talking about the city side, I'll throw my last 2 cents to keep everything nicely packaged on land use. I would say, Rick, it would really benefit everybody to have more information. And as far as strategies go, I think you can't have good strategies if you don't have good information. I would recommend, at least on the city side, that cities really need to understand their fiscal picture, their land use performance fiscal picture. They really need to understand their local economy well. They really need to understand their jobs, workforce profile. They really need to understand whether or not there are any clusters where they have some kind of competitive advantage. And I'll throw just a couple of examples out to explain. It turns out in Rancho Cucamonga, we have an economic advantage of, or because we have a cluster of advanced manufacturing. Partly it's our workforce is a little bit different than a lot of other cities in the Inland Empire, but that's just a plain reality for us. And so we engineered our code to recognize and respond to our local workforce, which it is more geared towards advanced manufacturing. So we prioritize our code for those manufacturing uses, make it easier to get those things built than it might be, a large logistics facility. Not that a large logistics facility couldn't be built here, but the path forward on manufacturing is easier because it better fits our economic profile. It also better fits our needs on fiscal performance. When we were working on our code update a few years ago, we came to learn that the really large facilities, really large industrial facilities, I'm not going to say logistics or warehousing, but real big ones, they are super efficient for business. That is why they want to build them, because it's really efficient for business. That doesn't help us on the city side. They actually generate a lot less tax revenue for us. That's a combination of sales tax, property tax, etc., per acre than the real small industrial buildings, especially ones that have sales tax or manufacturing components. So it's important for communities to recognize that for us, in a lot of ways, those buildings end up becoming a loser for us after 5 or 10 years. And so we need different fiscal tools or fiscal strategies to make sure that we're able to serve those larger industrial facilities way into the future, right? And that's just a matter of information. It's not us hating industrial. It's not us loving industrial. It's just for us to provide good services, for them to be competitive as a business here in the city. We have to understand what the impacts are, what the benefits are, and try and align them so that we can continue to have a really good environment, really good quality of life, really good business environment here. So I really think it comes down to, you got to know your individual situation. You got to have good information, try and build some flexibility into your tool sets and policies so that you can recognize and realize some of the benefits that come with investment and get ahead of and minimize any of the potential impacts or costs that come with new different types of development.
Thanks, Matt.
I think we need to scale up the fight for protecting workers' rights to organize and enforcing labor laws on the books, and making sure that there's enough boots on the ground to really monitor and implement, right, labor laws that are being violated every day, and to support workers that are organizing. I think that is a huge way in which we can lift up this region and its economy. The workers are doing that hard groundwork, and we can support them when they do, right? Whether it be the Teamsters or i.e. Amazon Workers United or Amazon Labor Union or the UAW, which is currently on strike, right, and has pickets up right now in around manufacturing, right? I think we can support workers, when they take bold action.
Great. Dr. Marino and then Weston, last words.
Yes, I think one of the challenges is this perception that policymakers are not prioritizing they're prioritizing economic development over the local needs and the needs of communities and workers. And I think like Matt said, and I think to some extent Scott said, information is important in gathering information, but the information has to go in both directions. So not only do we want to just give information to people, but we also want to listen. And I think one of the roles of ICSD perhaps is to convene the different stakeholders so that the information is going in both directions, not just from the government agencies or from the employers to the communities, but going in the other direction as well, so that you have a more complete understanding of what are the needs and what are the impacts of this industry on all the different players in these communities.
Great. Weston.
Yeah, two quick things. One, I want to piggyback just quickly off of what Scott and Matt said. I'm a big proponent of cities in this specific instance doing comprehensive planning and then doing the CEQA analysis behind it, because once you have it entitled, you're going to attract investment and you're going to attract the right type of investment, and you're not going to have a situation where someone's on spec coming into your community. And as part of that, you can have the requirements around things like local hire, community benefits, all of these things, but it's upfront and you're going to get willing partners and investors as opposed to creating stalemates between investors in your community and what the community wants. And I think that's a way for residents of communities and cities to really take back the narrative, is to say, we are going to plan and permit this, and then we're going to select the investors that come in to these properties as participants for whatever criteria that is, whether it's smaller buildings, better tax revenue, what have you. And then on the other side, I think a really big thing, and there's a huge gap in this, is just education on the industry as a whole. We've talked, I think that's been a theme here, but there's this old saying, and it was by Mr. Jimmy Hoffa of the Teamsters, but if you bought it, a truck brought it. And I will tell you, in this day and age, there's not a company or an organization that doesn't depend on their supply chain. Throughout COVID, hospitals couldn't have cared for patients if their supply chain didn't get them medicine and PPE and equipment in a reasonable time and fashion. And at the same time, again, as I led off, most of the time when we talk in communities about trucking and logistics, it's about dirty, it's about wages, it's about traffic. And at the end of the day, again, the way that you solve a lot of it is stop buying things. So if you don't buy things, we don't need trucks, we don't need warehouses, we don't need these things. And I think there needs to be an education as to how essential this industry is. And again, if we can have a situation where the industry doesn't feel like they're always on the defensive and the community doesn't feel like they're on the defensive, but there can be some collaboration and consensus to understand how you get a win-win from everybody. That's really what we need. But to start, we need real good education, because maybe the most disappointing thing throughout the pandemic was watching national news about my industry that couldn't have been more wrong. And yet that's what the average individual is hearing about our industry. And so I really think that it is time for all of us to come together to put our unique wants at the door and say, how do we build a better supply chain for everybody involved and have more empowered workers and communities and a more sustainable environment? But the unfortunate thing is there's so much trust that's not there, because we're all looking at different information and different facts, that we come in with our boxing gloves as opposed to come in, trying to roll up our sleeves and see how we can get a win-win.
Yeah.
Speaking of environmental sustainability, my lights just shut off because I'm the only one.
Yeah, that's funny. Thank you, Weston, for your comments. Those are all really good comments. And we're just up about 5 o'clock, so I'm going to shut this down. But first off, Weston, Matt, Scott, Dr. Reese, Dr. Moreno, thank you so much for your time and your input. It's been really interesting. Those of you that are still with us on the other end of this, we have been taking notes of the questions, and they're really good questions. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to more of them, but I promise you we're going to take a look at them. We're going to work with these panelists and see if we can provide a way for them to respond to those questions, and then we'll find a way to get them back out to you. So thank you again. Just as a reminder, our next seminar series focus will be on obviously the environmental impacts of the warehousing and logistics industry. We're going to focus in on pollution and public health. We have 5 confirmed speakers. You may have already received information on that. That is scheduled for Wednesday, October 11th at 4 o'clock. And we look forward to seeing you all then. So again, on behalf of all of us at UCR, thank you very much for participating in this first session. Have a great afternoon.